Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our latest installment for our Boardroom program. My name is Colin MacDonald. I am the partner sponsor of our Boardroom program, and I'm joined today by Paul Lee. Paul is our TMT Insights partner, and Paul is going to bring us our global TMT Insights partner. Paul this morning is going to bring us through our global predictions, and as I've mentioned recently at another event where Paul presented, these predictions are sometimes right and sometimes wildly wrong, but they certainly bring us and challenge us in our thinking in relation to what we expect within TMT for the next 12 to 18 months window. While it is a TMT survey, we do think that it's useful to bring to a broader community as technology, the use of technology, and how you interact with your stakeholders, be they investors, be they your staff, or be they your customers and suppliers, is invariably through technology at this particular point in time. So with that, I'll hand you over to Paul. Good morning, Paul.
Morning.
Bring us through a short presentation. This presentation is being recorded, and any questions, please stick them into the Q&A box that's available at the bottom of the screen. Thanks, Paul, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Collie. I fully agree that what we're talking about today, even though I have a TMT background, the focus of this is definitely horizontal. And in fact, earlier today, I was hosting a generative AI discussion breakfast, and we had representation from lots of different sectors, so from technology to airlines. But this is a topic which binds us all. So as Colin mentioned, I'm just going to do a bit of a presentation and talk a little bit about so what we're seeing specifically around the area of generative AI. And just to give a bit of background on myself, so I've been at Deloitte for 24 years and started working in technology a long, long time ago. So it was back in 1987. And this topic of generative AI is something which has really captured the imagination of most leaders in all markets. And this includes a lot of the non-executive directors, and we've run lots of sessions for NEDs in London and also in different markets, just to try and provide a view on what's happening in the space, because there is a lot of noise out there in terms of what's happening. So hopefully what we're trying to do is give you some of the signal that you should be perceiving from that. So I am just going to share my slides first of all, and I hope that this is working now. So please do let me know if I've pressed the wrong button, because I am not as good at using Zoom as I used to be, but I'm assuming that everything is fine at the moment.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So first of all, I expect what you have seen is lots of this kind of messaging in the press. And when it comes to Gen AI, what we know is that there is a lot of excitement and also fear around the topic. And we're at a point in society where the press, because it relies on online readership and so on, clicks, tends to be a little bit sensational in terms of reporting. And so whenever you've got a headline which makes people fearful or excited, or often both, that tends to resonate more than something which will say nothing to see, or don't worry, or the impact is actually this rather than 10x or 100x. So there's lots of stuff around this being a once in a generation revolution. So from Bill Gates, there's a headline here about stability. AI CEO says AI will prove to be more disruptive than the pandemic. So that particular individual actually, he was disrupted, and he left his role a while after making that comment. You've got comments about jobs being influenced by AI. And, all of these have a semblance of truth, and all of them have a semblance of exaggeration. So, what we're trying to do today is just give you a pragmatic view of where we think the world is right now when it comes to AI and Gen AI. And the first thing I want to do is just provide a bit of a context as to where we are in the market. So, one thing about artificial intelligence is it's been around for decades, and a lot of modern technology that we use every single day of all types, not just whatever's on a device, but within cars, within buildings. So when you're moving around, so things like traffic lights, they're all being enhanced, improved in some way using artificial intelligence. And I think when a technology is really successful, then it becomes both ubiquitous and invisible. And that's what I would say a lot of AI is right now. And I expect almost everybody or everyone on the call has got a smartphone. And a smartphone has a lot of AI, which enables the battery to have a fighting chance of lasting for a whole day. Because what the AI is doing is minimizing the power consumption of a finite power supply as well as it can do. And the reason why you'll get to the end of the day is because it's turning off the engine, so to speak, and turning off the demand on that battery all the time. And a further element of the AI revolution is machine learning, which is effectively around the automation of the creation of the rules which enable AI. And AI is to a large extent, it's a very vast program which is based on rules. And if you have humans creating all the rules, so like pattern recognition, recognizing that, say on your phones, a photograph of a dog is a dog, and also be able to recognize who's who in the photos. That's based on machine learning, because if you relied on humans to do all of that, it would just take too long. And then generative AI, which is often conflated with AI, came around in the 2010s. This is an output from research which part of Google was doing, and the original intent was to create much better translation tools. And a side product of that innovation was the ability to generate text um, in a very accurate way. But as often happens, Gen AI, in terms of how we often perceive it, is a inadvertent output of another form of technology or another intent. But the main takeaway from this is that Gen AI is not AI, it's a subset. And also that AI, machine learning, and Gen AI are not new, but certainly Gen AI is novel because we forget what is new. Um, and that's one of the main things just to bear in mind is that Gen AI is a subset of all AI, so it's important not to conflate the two. Now, another thing which is really important to bear in mind when it comes to Gen AI is just understanding how it works and how it doesn't work, because every technology which is out there is going to have its strengths and its weaknesses. So one thing about generative AI is it's what's called a probabilistic model. And what that means is what it delivers as an output is what is probably right, but it is not definitively right. So if you use, for example, a calculator and you use it to do a multiplication or a sum or whatever, it will always give you the same answer. Also, if you use a traditional search engine and use it to look up a piece of information, it will tend to give you, if you do the same prompt within a few minutes, more or less exactly the same answer. You may get different ads which come next to it, but it will largely give you the same answer. With generative AI, what you get is what the model thinks is probably right. And it is guessing what it thinks it is right. And the guess may be 100% accurate, or it may be 100% wrong for certain elements. And when it gets things wrong, the technical term that's often used is hallucination. So some people call it errors, but the technical term is hallucination. So when you hear hallucination in the context of Gen AI, that effectively is just a function of how Gen AI works, which is it's a probabilistic model, therefore it will get things wrong. Now, to give an example of how that works, so over here you've got a probability ratio being applied to text. And so after generative, what is likely is the word AI, and it may be even higher than 99%. And then after type, the most likely preposition is of. After artificial, then it might be intelligence. And as we move closer to the summer, if you were to type artificial into, say, a search engine, which will try and guess what you like to say so it can autocomplete, then artificial and then grass starts coming up because people are starting to redo their gardens. And artificial grass just feels like a hack, so you don't have to maintain it. And then capable is often followed by of. So when you take this approach and you apply it to, let's say, the creation of an essay, you can have a probabilistic model generate 1,000-word output based on the summary of an existing document. And it's this kind of principle, but applied to a much more powerful degree. And another thing to familiarize yourself with is when it comes to generative AI, there are different types of generative AI. So the technical term that's often used is modalities, which is, in a sense, it's different genres. No, it's not genres. It's different categories of output. So you can have text as a form. So that would be ChatGPT, which is very commonly used. There are lots of tools which do that. Or it may be something which pops up in your email and offers to write a longer version of that email for you, or to change the tone of that email, or to condense it. So that's a text-based tool. But also you've got images. And yesterday there was an announcement from OpenAI, which is one of the best-known companies in this field, about the launch of a new image-based generator. And then you've got audio, you've got code, which is talked about a lot about, and then you've got video. And what I find is, often if I look at places like Reddit or Twitter, there are lots of examples of images or videos. But one thing to bear in mind is these are not very commonly used, but the outputs are commonly viewed. So you've got this cleft between the volume of creators, which is very few, and the volume of viewers, which is a bit higher. Now, one other thing I find about generative AI is the perception often is that everyone's using it. And according to our surveys, that's not yet the case. So this is some data which is for the UK audience, and this is last April, May, around that time. And at that point in time, out of 100 people, our estimate, it was about 4 people in the UK would use a text-based generative AI tool in a given day. And then for an image, it was almost nobody. And then for audio, code, and video, the closest number was 0. It's not quite 0, but the point we want to make is these tools are not commonly used. So it's very, very different, say, to a browser or an application on a browser like e-commerce, or using a search engine, or even using video delivered over IP, so video on demand. They are not, those are popular tools. At the moment, Gen AI is not that popular. Now, just looking at some other ways of looking at the market. So, one thing that we're often trying to understand is um, how is something going to pay for itself? Because ultimately, every product has to cover its costs. And when I look at the generative AI market, there is a lot of investment going into it, and all of that will need to be paid for. And the question is, when does it get paid for, and who pays for it? And what I wanted to share with you is two predictions that we'd written for 2024, but we'd written in 2023. So about 18 months ago. And they were looking at two elements of Gen AI. So one of them is revenues, another one is costs. So the one on the top is revenues. And what we were predicting was that when it came to Gen AI, it would largely be enterprises that would be paying for it. And so we did a forecast for the total spend as of the fourth quarter of last year on specific Gen AI upgrades to existing enterprise software. So there's lots of enterprise software vendors out there. Most of them have a Gen AI module, and we'd forecast $10 billion in revenue. And we were wrong. So it was too high, and the actual number was under half of that. And we also had a forecast for one of the costs, which is the specific semiconductors being used in data centers to enable the various elements of Gen AI. So it would be on the training, on the reasoning, or other elements within there. And we were too low. So one thing which is quite notable is that as of last year, the costs were higher than expected, the revenues were lower than expected. But this is at one point in time. And um, and again, when you contrast it with, but then who's using it? So this is a bit more data on usage. And this is looking at a EU lens. So it's not just UK data, because you can always go, but is it going to be too high or too low for one specific country? So this is data for the EU, and you can see it's very similar to what we had for the UK. So it's about 3% daily versus 4% in the UK. And you may be wondering about the data for Ireland. And this was as of last October, and there was a lot more depth available to this. And one thing you can see is you've got a quarter of people who are not aware of Gen AI, and that's quite common in most countries. And again, this is very different to general digital tools. You've got a lot of lack of awareness of this tool. And then you've got most people who are aware of it, but you've got under half who are using it as of last October. And again, when you apply the daily split to those who've used it, it's about 5% who say that they effectively use it on a daily basis. So it's not that high. And then one other element of what's happening in Ireland is also the split between the usage by gender. Now, generally, what we see for brand new technologies is it will tend to be younger men who are more likely to use technologies. And over here, what you've got is you can see, so in terms of usage, it's fairly equal. So that's the second cluster. In terms of awareness, it's much higher amongst men. It's also the case that men tend to overclaim knowledge, at least in the UK, may also be the case in Ireland. And then when you look at a tool like ChatGPT, there is an 18 percentage point variation in awareness by gender. For Snapchat, it's the opposite. For Google Gemini, again, you've got quite a large variation in awareness. So this is something which I expect will equalize over time, but the variation by gender is quite pronounced at the moment. Now, the reason why I'm asking this question here is because obviously one of the big questions that you'd be having about the companies that you are advising is going to be how appropriate is this for our companies? And part of the question around how appropriate is this is going to be the cost of this. And I think most of you will know what movie this is. So it's from Bridget Jones, and it's the first version. Um, and so this is the original script, which was from 2000. So that's a point at which somebody who was in London could afford to actually work and live in London, because it's all become unaffordable now. And that script was about 25,000 words. Now, an exercise we often do with some of our clients is to ask them this question, which is, what does it cost to use a Gen AI tool to affect an outcome? And so, one thing which Gen AI is often used for is for summarizing. So we can say, what would it cost to upload this document and then to summarize it into 1,000 words, but using two different tools? And the tools are the cheapest tool from OpenAI and the most expensive tool. So you can see this contrast over here. Now, very few people know the answer to this, which I think is a data point in itself. So the excitement is around what it can do, and we're not asking enough about, but what would it cost? And so when you get to the what would it cost, you tend to get a bit of a shock in different ways. And so for the first tool, the cost of the exercise is under a cent. And the cost of using the more sophisticated tools is 87 cents. So it's 100 times higher. And what we generally find is that there is a lack of awareness of just how much more expensive it is. Now, other things to bear in mind is when you get generative AI and the ability to create images, you also create new vulnerabilities. And one of the vulnerabilities is around deepfakes. So a deepfake is a um, a false image, and it's often being used malignly. So it could be used to create false images which are hurtful, or it could be used. So at the moment, one of the risks is replicating the voice of somebody senior and also the look of somebody senior to get money out of a company. So you may get someone who sounds like a CFO calling somebody and asking that person to transfer money into a bank account. So this is something which is a live risk right now. But there are also broader risks around this, which is around trust in news and the ability to abuse trust in news. And when we look at trust in news, so this over here is some data for the UK in terms of how people get news. And when you average it out, most people get their news, or the average person gets their news from TV news. But if you look at it by age group, younger people get their information from social media more than they do from TV news. And TV news, as you know, is highly regulated and highly scripted and has a responsibility and an obligation, which is in statute, to be informative and closer to the truth. But the same rules may not apply to social media. So when you consider that and you look at the ability to create faked images, then you have a societal challenge. You also have a commercial challenge too. Now, you've probably heard of the phrase to Photoshop because this has been around for decades. And I remember when I was at university, Photoshop was available on Macs, and it's something that you could do, which is you could take out the background of an image and replace it. But it required a lot of time, it required skill, and then it wasn't very good. And you fast forward to now, and So imagine like the photograph on the left, which could just be a regular photograph of somebody who's sitting down. And you've now got the ability via a smartphone, which would have taken the photograph, to add content into that image. So you can manipulate what we could call edit the image after the actual event of the photograph being taken. And what's been done on the right-hand side is adding in drug and drink accoutrements to change the tone of that photo. So that could be used for blackmail. Now, the thing about the right-hand side image is, so it's going to be small in your screens, but if you were to zoom in into that image, it's really hard to see that it is actually a fake. And secondly, the skill required to create that image was simply a text-based prompt. So the cost of creating the image is very low. The cost of detecting the falsehood of that image is very high. And that is a societal problem. It's a commercial problem. So authenticating the veracity of images has become harder. There are already solutions for this, but this is where we are right now. And the last thing I just want to talk about is, so one of the terms you're going to be hearing a lot more about this year is what's called agentic AI. A fuller term is autonomous generative AI agents. And this is where you've got different AI tools which have literally agency. So they're able to act on your behalf and collaborate with other ones to affect outcomes. And what's often talked about is, let's say, a calendar agent talking to a flight booking agent and a taxi booking agent, all talking to each other to be able to work out what the outcome should be. So yet again, it's like a EA replacement tool, but I remember these going back into the 90s with voice-based EA replacement tools. Now, what we have as our prediction is what we're expecting is that in 2025, you've got 25% of companies will launch agentic AI, but it's only 25% of companies that use Gen AI. So it's a very different bar to saying 25% of all companies. But what we found with the press reporting of this is they talk about 25% of companies will use agentic AI. So they're sensationalizing the story. And then our further projection is half of all companies which use Gen AI will use this in 2027. And again, the press reporting focuses on the big number and removes the actual sample that this is based on. So it goes back to, like, the very first slide, which is on headlines. And my recommendation there is, be a bit wary about the content of the headlines. So that's what I wanted to share in terms of materials. And I'm going to stop sharing my slides and
Thanks, Paul.
give the floor back to Collie.
So feel free, everybody, if you'd like to put a question into Q&A, but I think you covered a fair amount there, Paul. Just an interesting question for me, excluding the price of using the prompt. Is it precision is the difference between GPT and Strawberry? Or why are people, what's the elevation you're getting from getting up into using Strawberry?
Yeah, so one of the big differences is reasoning. So when you think about like the value of a human knowledge worker, the ability to process information and to reason is a lot of the value. And we just look at ourselves, and one way in which you become more valuable to a client is the ability to reason. So that's the what's being applied to those two different models. Is the reasoning capability, which is used as a measure of intelligence. And in some cases, you don't need a lot of reasoning to get the sufficiently good outcome. In other cases, you need to have a lot of reasoning when there's lots of nuance involved to get to the right outcome. So that's the reason why. And the reason why it costs a lot more is because it's using a lot more processing power to be able to get that. because the underlying prompt is more sophisticated. So that's a reason why.
Okay, so that also, I think it's fair to say that that cost also excludes energy, hardware, blah blah blah. That's just the prompt.
So it'll be factoring in the cost of, it's a reflection of the cost of the underlying hardware, and what's in there, the underlying data center in which it is, and the energy required to power that specific exercise being used in that data center. So it's a reflection of those underlying costs.
In terms of where regulation is on this, Europe, EU, sorry, Europe and the EU, same thing. Europe, UK, and the US. Just your views in relation to where that's going, what's that going to do?
Yeah, so where we've got sort of most relative certainty, I would say, is in the EU because the EU published the AI Act, which was published on the 1st of August last year. And there are elements, I mean, the general applicability of that AI Act has a 24 months lead time. So it'll be 2026 when most entities which are in the EU or selling to the EU will have to be fully compliant. And I would say a year back, the expectation was that most likely someone like the UK would probably coalesce because so that's what happened with GDPR. So you've got like more or less the same kind of act. There is now a greater possibility given our expectations of geopolitical shifts have shifted since 12 months ago. And so when you factor that in, then probably you've got more room for variations to come in terms of what the UK may do versus the EU. And then, when it comes to the US, there's a lot of variation, which may be by state, but I think at this point in time, it's really hard to know what's actually going to happen because there is new news happening quite frequently at a pace which we're not familiar with.
Yeah, no, thank you. And then a question from Roisin
Mm,
coming through there.
mm,
What do you think is the step off point, the adoption time frame for traditional businesses to
mhm.
agentic AI, and what do you think the entry point for agentic AI is in terms of what do you think the use cases for agentic AI might be?
Yeah, there's lots of different. I mean, I would say right now, I don't think anybody really knows for sure because the technology, I would say, is still nascent. Um, I mean, there may be sort of like exceptions that I'm just not aware of, but generally, it's emerging technology. And then what you need to be able to find is like the right pairing of supply and demand. And that takes time. And then also, what you need to be able to do is effectively move at the pace of an enterprise. So the technology may be there, but enterprises are vast beings which have lots of elements within there, which include people. And you may be able to turn off, say, one cohort of people, but certainly within Europe, you can't do it sort of like a stroke of a pen. You need to phase these things in over time. So in terms of agentic, I would just get familiar with what it can do and what it can't do. But I would always focus on what are the problems that need to be resolved and try not to go, this is a cool technology, let's find a place to apply this. It happens many times, but it kind of reminds me of when some mobile apps came in, and this is one of the many things which will date me. So that goes back to like about 2008, and then you had tablet-based apps, and so often I talk to companies, including our own firm, and they just go, "Well, the answer is an app," So, and let's work out, how to retrofit our problems into that. And very often the answer was not an app; it just wasn't the right thing to do. A browser-based solution would have been better than an app. So it's really important, I think, to be really aware of is this the right technology for you at the right point in time?
Which goes back to the whole thing is what's the business challenge that we're trying to fix and picking the technology, isn't it? Rather than letting IT get run away with developing stuff.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's not just so generally, I don't see it's IT getting sort of running away. It tends to be senior leadership who get shown a solution, get a lot of FOMO, and then sort of allocate money to come up with solutions. And at the core of every business, I just think it's so important to be understanding like how to generate greater value. And often one of the ways of doing that is through automation of some of the more mundane processes to enable the workforce to focus on more cerebral tasks that can't be automated and to become really ingenious rather than getting bogged down in everyday tasks. But that's been the case for decades. Automation is a constant, and technology can sometimes do that automation. And in some cases, it is another application of technology, just like better materials is the answer. Or I was talking to like the airline who came earlier today and was talking about it was basically having higher utilization based on lower capacity, just delivers better profit. And you don't need complex AI to tell you that.
So better for load planning. In turn, so Deirdre Smith has a question. If planning to use AI for product or services, how do we accurately measure the cost, not in terms of the token of the prompts, but in terms of carbon output, environmental impact, energy, water, rare earth metals, etc. And can we do that, or is that just so broad that
Um, so right now, that's a really good question. And it's really hard to answer that because the efficiencies of the models are getting better and better all the time. And so a prompt which may currently use 1 unit of power may require 100th unit of power to do so in it may be 6 months' time or 12 months' time. And working out the long-term emissions per prompt is too hard to do for certain right now, but I think it's possible to get a guide of what that should be. But over time, what you are very likely to see is a reduction in the emissions per prompt, but that's what's expected. So I can't say that for certain because the future's never certain, but the expectation is the emissions per prompt should go down over time. Now, all declines, I would say you can forecast a decline, but you can't always forecast the rate of the decline or the point at which the rate of decline bottoms out. That's one of the known unknowns. So it's a bit like the expectation was a couple of years ago that the models would get constantly better, but they have reached seem to have reached a plateau. So you can put in more training data, but the accuracy doesn't always get better.
that makes sense? Anthony Brennan has a question, and I'm assuming this isn't investment advice because we're not giving any investment advice to this. Anthony is wondering, as do we see a winner in relation with DeepSeek coming along? Google there with its search, will it be similar to like Google where other competitors fell away and Google kind of became most dominant? Or are we seeing kind of a number of platforms being there and different strokes for different folks?
Um, right now, the easy answer is nobody really knows. I think it is quite likely, given how technology is a really global business, that you're likely to have a few major global winners. One of the um, nuances to this, though, is when we talk about artificial intelligence, what we don't often discuss is what do we mean by intelligence? And I would say companies which do lots of coding, when they talk about intelligence and the ability to replicate human levels of intelligence, it's their specific type of intelligence. And creative intelligence, so the ability to write a good song, is a completely different skill set. And that's an equally valid and important and productive form of intelligence. But when I see references from the tech companies as to what intelligence is, that tends to be based on the kind of people that they would hire. So you've got that kind of thought bubble, which is applying there. And then also there's lots of different forms of, let's say, vertical sector intelligence, which are really important. And so what I can see possibly happening, but this is speculation because this is the best that you can do right now, is you'll have like core capabilities which are dominated by, you could say like search. It's not, I think, a risk to say, search is dominated by one company, which is Google at the moment. So it's vastly dominates there. And then, but then you've got various different other entities which have different data sets and different specializations, which can also thrive in their verticals. So if we look forward to 2030, I expect what we may have is sort of like core intelligence, and then you've got vertical sector or horizontal sector intelligence as well, which may rely on the very big players. But overall, because I find very few companies, so they tend to have like um, a narrow understanding because they're specialists. They don't understand what intelligence they lack. And that's the opportunity for smaller companies to develop more specific solutions, as we have now. That's what I think will happen in 2030. But I could be quite wrong. But I
Yeah,
expect that's what's going to happen.
yeah, thank you. So Andre Bing has a question. I might take this one. So what can boards do in terms of policy and risk as they report back to auditors, internal management? Should this become a permanent board agenda or a full or committee level? So let me cover that off, Andre. What we're seeing good organizations do is appoint somebody with responsibility for AI, and there's also then an executive committee in relation to it, which is multidisciplinary, which includes data protection officer, HR, IT, clearly some strategy, business leadership in areas that may join and leave that group. Um, so that's a multidisciplinary team who would then report to both one and or both the risk committee and to the board itself, invariably, because at the board there's concern of this in relation to the risk side of it as well as the innovation side of it. So two prongs and how they report may be different, and that is invariably where we're seeing good organizations at the moment. Paul, do you see anything different?
One comment I'd make around this topic is because we talk to boards as a group and boards as individuals, and um, understanding Gen AI is hard work, and having it as one item is probably too little. And given this could be a generational inflection point, and I stress it could be, I think generally I would recommend boards spend a lot more time in just understanding how it works and how it doesn't work. And, also talking to other firms, not necessarily direct competitors, about what they've seen and what they've not seen. Because a really big problem I find is in public fora, lots of companies overclaim what they're actually doing, and it makes everyone else feel inadequate and behind as a result. And so this is something which we do quite a bit in Deloitte in London, is to host companies so that they can chat to each other under Chatham House rules and the Chatham House rule, and really find out what is going on, because most people are at the stage of pilots right now. They're not doing scale rollouts.
And in Ireland, we're seeing a lot of use cases that are successful use cases, but aren't getting past the risk aspect to it
Mhm.
or the value for money aspect to it. So I think that's really important that there's
Mhm.
learnings at the board level are brought to the board level in relation to, the where the investment is and the learnings as to why there's success and failure in relation to it, so that the board can help the organization to navigate where next. Excellent. Paul, that's it on the questions. Thank you very much again, Ruth. Thanks a million for hosting us or running the Zoom for us. Thank you everyone for joining. We hope you have a great rest of your morning and a great rest of your week. Thank you and goodbye.